Only mode.
Attitude Magazine and Attitude's ADHD Experts webinar series. Welcome to all of you joining us today and to our guest speaker, Chris Dendy. Today's topic is part of Attitude's Success at School series, which is a 10-part webinar series, runs August, September, and into October, is addressing ADHD behaviors in the classroom. Chris Dendy will be talking about what actually works when it comes to addressing challenging ADHD behaviors in the classroom, as well as what really doesn't work. We are really honored to have Chris with us today. She is an educator, a school psychologist, and mental health professional with over 40 years of experience. The real expert out there on working in schools with children with ADHD and executive function deficits. She was recently awarded one of only 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards from CHAD, the National Attention Deficit Disorder Organization. Huge honor. And again, we're very honored to have her today. She is the author of a number of books, one of them Teaching Teens with ADD, ADHD, and Executive Function Deficits. And I think you might be especially interested to hear about the newly published 3rd edition of a book that she wrote with her son Alex over 10 years ago about 12 ADHD teens. It's called A Bird's Eye View of Life with ADHD and EFD 10 years later. And she's also newly released something I can't wait to hear more about. It's called Father to Father, Expert Advice on ADHD, a book and a video, which apparently has some pretty amazing sections on discipline and behavior. So before Chris begins to speak, let me just describe, for those of you who may be new, how ADHD experts work. You're all muted. You please post your questions in the box on your screen. You can post them at any time while Chris is speaking or when she starts taking questions later on. If you have any problems hearing us, you should dial in via your phone line. After this session ends, you will find a complete replay of this webinar, including the slides, which you may download on the Attitude website at attitudemag.com/webinars. Let me just repeat that, because I think many people, when the slides start going and they see how interesting they are, become panicked that they won't be able to get it all down. You will find all of this available for replay, download, and note-taking on attitudemag.com/webinars. So with that, let me turn it over to Chris with our thanks again for being here.
Well, I must say I am just so delighted to be here, and with that wonderful introduction, I don't really even need to tell you who I am, because you know. I will say to you that one of the excellent resources I have seen on behavioral strategies is actually the logo of what you see on your screen. The Office of Special Education has established what they call the PBIS Center, and you can see all the words spelled out there. And they have wonderful resources, and I'm going to show you an example a little later on. But before I launch into the specific behaviors, I want to kind of paint the big picture for you first. And I want to give you 2 major take-home messages right up front. One is that you can't deal with behavior problems and executive function deficits in isolation. You simultaneously have to look at the academic issues. We know that 50% of our kids do have learning difficulties, some of them actually learning disabilities, and these hidden learning problems are often the result of the behavior problems you see. So the second major point is I'm going to deal with kind of 2 types of behaviors. One are the behaviors that result in school failure, things like forgetting homework and long-term projects. And then the second would be irritating behaviors, such as fidgeting, blurting out, and that sort of thing. Now, I was just confessing to Susan that of the last 6 days, I've been on airplanes 4 of those days. And so in going back and preparing for today, I realized that I had left out some very important slides. So I'm going to add them verbally in as we go, but I will immediately send the corrected version to Susan and Wayne and Stuart so that it will be on site and listed properly. And the other great resource that you will find that I should mention here is Attitudes on series, their own website of the webinars, because you can go back and see, you know, they've been able to include some of the very top leaders in the field who talk on a variety of issues, and that's a wonderful library resource for you. So with that, let's get started. Well, the first thing, I laugh because I'm telling you the obvious. Behavioral strategies are not as effective for students with ADHD. And I'm sure both parents and teachers have learned that the hard way, because you punish them and they repeat their misbehavior. I know once Alex said to me, he said, "Mom, I'm sorry, but when you punish me, it just doesn't seem to work." And it really aggravated me no end until some 10 or 15 years later, I heard Russell Barkley say, "Our children don't learn from behavioral interventions as well as other students." And I thought, well, Chris, your son at age 8 was very smart. You should have listened to him. So we know that the issues that our students face are linked to a difference in brain chemistry. Remember also that this misbehavior often looks intentional, when in fact it's often linked directly to the student's ADHD and executive function deficits, and about that more as we go along. First, I want to remind you of some of the basics, why our children struggle, and outline some of the common struggles you will see before I get into the specific behavioral interventions. One is, we know from Dr. Philip Shaw's research that the brains of students with ADHD are delayed by as much as 3 years when compared to their peers. Now that is significant because we have to have realistic expectations for our children. So a 12-year-old who gets into middle school and forgets his homework, you've got to remember he may be chronologically 12, but developmentally he's more like a 9-year-old. So we're expecting things of these children that their brain maturity does not allow them to do very well. And so we have to put some supports in place that will help them more effectively. Dr. Barkley, Russell Barkley, has gone on further to say that our children have a 30% developmental delay, and by that he means by tests looking at organizational skills and brain maturation and the like. So in some ways then you may see a teenager who's 16 who's more like 12 or 13 in some areas, organizationally, that sort of thing. The executive function deficits are key. If you don't know about that already, aren't familiar with that, I refer you to my website. I have an article on that website. It's just my name, chrisdendy.com. We know the second major point is we know that they have decreased blood flow and glucose absorption. That was from Dr. Zemetkin's landmark study many years ago, which finally reassured us parents that this is a real condition. It's not just that we're bad parents. And let me take this moment to assure teachers and parents that it's not bad parenting. Yes, we could do better. We can learn new parenting strategies, and we parents should certainly strive to do that. They have found that 5 key parts of the brain are smaller. Not that they're damaged, they're just smaller, and a lot of it has to do with the connections between neurons. In other words, it's like the wires between telephone poles, and all the messages aren't getting through. And then one of the most exciting things we've discovered is that there's reduced brain chemistry in the reward center. Now, what that means to you from a practical perspective is that your child can do easy things that don't require a lot of working memory or academic skills. It used to just, my husband would say, well, he can watch TV and he can play video games. Why can't he do his homework? Well, the difference is the brain needs to kick into a higher gear when it starts using its memory and its focus and on academic tasks. And our children have reduced dopamine and the neurotransmitters, receptors, and there's just not enough brain chemistry there is my point. Unless, of course, they are on medication, and that certainly helps the reward center work better. The other thing you need to know is that over 2/3 of our children have a second condition that challenges them. It might be a learning disability, it might be anxiety, it might be depression, or in much less frequently maybe bipolar. But a lot of times we treat the ADHD and we don't look any further. So if you have a child who's struggling and who's on medication and still struggling, then you need to take a closer look at some of the other related issues and also getting the medicine right. Our kids have greater emotionality. I will talk about that later, and that's again related to the immaturity. And our children, many of them are often undertreated. In other words, the dose of medicine is too low or it has worn off. Now, I was trained at FSU under two, at that time, top behavior specialists in the country. I took every behavioral intervention course I could find, and I thought behavioral strategies were the answer to everything. We had the typical chart on the refrigerator, and Alex had to earn stars from doing certain things. But I realized at home it was a family issue, so I also had to earn stars if I didn't yell. So you know how these children can try our patience. But here's something interesting. Mark Atkins did a study, and he intervened with tutoring with our kids. And so what he found is that the academic interventions improved both academics and behavior. But the converse is not always true. In other words, behavioral interventions sometimes only change the behavior, but don't improve the academics. So obviously the bottom line is the combination of the two is the best approach. I want to point out to you the common academic problems here. And I'm just going to briefly touch on these. Most of you know them. A certain percentage of our children have slow processing speed, and my son was one of those. That means they read more slowly, write more slowly, produce less written work, tests take longer, homework takes longer, so that interferes greatly with their ability to be successful in school. And there are interventions that can help support students who have that challenge. With regard to output, they have trouble finding the right words. Some of our children ramble a lot. With regard to writing essays or reports, 65% of our children have problems with that. So teachers and parents both need to be aware of that. One study pointed that out. They have, well, I can't go into it here because those are really academic interventions, but I have a whole series of suggestions like that in my book, Teaching Teens with ADD, ADHD, and Executive Function Deficits, and I'll tell you more about that later. They often have trouble memorizing multiplication tables. How many of you have sat at the kitchen table with your child and practiced over and over and over and over only for them to forget them the next day? It's not that they can't memorize, but you need to use specific memory strategies to help them memorize. Spelling is a problem. Listening comprehension, you know that's a fact, because you tell your child something and daydreaming far away. So there are some things you can do for that also. For example, putting a list of 1, 2, 3 things on a post-it note and putting it somewhere, things you want him to remember. Reading comprehension is a problem. Your child may say to you or the teacher, Mom, I read the page and I can't remember a thing I read. And part of it is they have trouble pulling out the key facts into their working memory. So this is where I'm adding a couple of slides. So you don't have these, so you can just listen, and then I will, as I've promised, send them to the office as soon as possible. I'm going to list 9 executive functions very briefly. Working memory, that's holding information in mind and manipulating it. If you can't do that, you can't write essays, and you can't do complex step math. Getting started. Who knew that getting started was an executive skill? And how many of us, teachers at school and parents at home, have nearly pulled our hair out because our child can't get started? And the problem is that looks like laziness to us. Barclay also lists reconstitution. That means like taking information and organizing it. And it's as though the CEO of our brain or the conductor of the orchestra is very weak. And I sometimes literally joke that he must be drunk because he can't get everything organized in our brain to work at the same time. Another important one is internalizing language or self-talk. We use self-talk, for example, you did today, to say I need to be at the webinar at a certain time in order to get on the site. Well, our children's self-talk is delayed, so the messages don't come to get started on their homework. Controlling emotions, shifting and changing from one topic to another, organization and planning, you know that, organization of materials, and self-monitoring. So let me just briefly mention some of the practical aspects of that. The academics, you will see problems in two areas mainly. One is in academics, early reading and academic achievement, memorizing letters, colors, numbers. And I've really just mentioned all of these just now, the written essays and completing math and difficulty completing long-term projects on time. And then there's another set of executive skills that I call academically related, and what's important about them is they have always looked and we have always perceived them as laziness. But these are the items: following directions, being organized, getting started and finishing, remembering assignments, analyzing and problem solving, planning for the future, controlling emotions. Now, I write about this extensively, but I just needed for you to have that in the big picture so that you would understand, you know, why you're seeing some of the issues in the classroom you're seeing. But one thing I will remind you of, punishment will not grow more white matter or the connective tissue, the telephone wires between the poles. It does not increase neurotransmitters, and it does not teach new skills. So the message is that you need to teach the skills that you want your children to have. Another thing for teachers in the lower grades especially, I would urge you to be very aware that behavioral strategies have a very powerful impact on young children, and choose wisely, otherwise the child may go home and think he thinks he's bad. And one of the strategies that teachers have used, and it can be used successfully, but it can also have a very powerful impact on the child, and that's the red light, green light, yellow light strategy. And if you've been, quote, good, your clip with your name on it is on the green light. If you get a warning, you're on the yellow. If you've been, quote, bad or misbehaved, you're on the red. Well, let me just read you two comments on the next slide from parents whose children had ADHD and other disabilities. During my son's third grade year, his teacher not only used a clip chart, she required the student to move his or her own clip. My son with ADHD, Asperger's, etc., was devastated daily. Cruel, just cruel. And a second mother said, I remember the stress this caused my son in kindergarten. He was never getting on green. These charts started out as a good idea, but they have become a public shaming tool for our children. So my point to you is the red light, green light system doesn't have to be bad, but you need to find a way to definitely get all your kids that they can earn the right by the end of the day to get back on the green. Because otherwise these kids go home and internalize, I'm a bad person. And that's not what teachers want. I know that quite well. On the next slide, I have, well, I keep thinking of things. This should read 4 tips for maximizing effectiveness of behavioral strategies. One is to intervene at the point of performance. And what does that mean? At the point of decision. So if you remind your child to the teacher, let's say 8 o'clock algebra class, John, whatever you do, don't forget your assignments in your books. Is that going to last until the afternoon when he goes to his locker and makes the decision about what to take home? The odds are no. So a tip for this would be to have his best friend meet him there. One woman paid a senior to meet her freshman at the locker to help her get out with that, home with all the right things. Another person, another school may provide an aide, but some way to help the child remember at the time. Remember, their memory is impaired and their sense of time is impaired. Give external reminders, and I'm going to talk more about that. Remember, their self-talk doesn't work very well. It's immature. So we need to give them external reminders, and I'll explain more about that. Give them alternative behaviors. If they're blurting out, take a picture of the child and say, raise your hand. Now, this is what I want you to do when you need to tell me something. And then you tape that picture on her desk so that she has that external visual reminder. And the other thing is, there's some trifolds from really good stuff, a group that makes teachers make supplies for other teachers. And it sits up and it has 3 different colors, the same principle. The green is I'm working fine, I don't need help. But if they keep flipping it over, it's sitting on their desk, then you know you need to get there to help them. The 4th one that is not on your list is if you can't change the behavior, change the environment. Well, now, keep in mind that most of the behaviors you're trying to deal with can't be changed because they're part of the ADHD and executive function deficits. So what you want to do is to, for example, the wiggler. My daughter-in-law, Sandra Dendy, put her student who was ADHD at the end of the row so she could stand, kneel, put her knees under her and sit in her desk, sit sideways so that she would not disturb anyone else. So those are the 4 tips. Moving on. Remember this is a very important slide. There's limited self-talk in ADHD. Remember, there's immature part of the brain that does not tell them when they need to get started, so you need an external reminder. Give them choices about this. A post-it note, an alarm, someone reminding them. So you might, now teachers, I'm really talking to both teachers and parents because you can't deal with just one in isolation. Teachers maybe make this suggestion to parents. Give your child a choice of when he starts homework. This is obviously an exaggeration. John, do you want to start your homework at 7 or 7:01? Obviously a silly comparison, but the point is made that he feels like he has some control over his life. The next one is just a slide from PBIS World that, again, I think you will find very helpful. And many of you are familiar with what's called RTI, Response to Intervention, which is mandated by the feds, and the purpose is to intervene early to help these children before their problems get so severe. There doesn't need to be a lot of testing to receive this. So all these things that you can't read in the chart over here on the left are words like disorganization, and you can click on that and it'll give you tier 1 interventions like breaking down assignments. So this is a wonderful resource for you. Oh my gosh, the battles we have had over homework. And one of the stories that Tommy always tells is that we didn't realize that Alex needed medication at night in order to do his homework and to stay on task and to remember what he learned. So he said if we had that to do over again, we would certainly give him medication, a smaller dose, 5 milligrams of Ritalin or something like that, to help him get through homework. The next one is tips for homework completion, and these are things that parents and teachers can consider. One is to have the student write in the assignment book, or have pairs check each other, or I particularly like the notion of row captains. The teacher makes the assignment, the row captain walks down the row, checks everybody so no one is singled out, and they might tap Alex's desk and say, you need to write your assignment down. And the same thing is true when it's time to take them up, because you know our kids forget to write them down and then they forget to turn them in. So the row captain at the end of the class walks down the row, picks up everybody's homework so we know that it is turned in. You can also have somebody photocopy the assignments. The student may make 5 copies and put it at the desk. Of course, Alex, you'd probably have to pick up the copy and take it to him and put it in his hands. In the next column, I'm particularly impressed with this new software. The name has changed from Remind 101 to Remind.com, but it's a software whereby parents and teachers and the students enter the number, and the teacher enters the homework, and the assignment goes out to not only the child but to the parent. And it's really wonderful because then there's no chance. And I think technology may be the saving grace for our children. Some of these other methods are really not as significant now. Email, yes, to some degree. Teachers' websites help. I always ask about a homework pattern. as a parent, and if you're the teacher, tell the parent, I give homework 4 days a week, particularly if it's a subject you know your child will have a problem with. Then I encourage parents to talk to the teachers. An extra book at home, we always knew. And again, these are things that teachers can tell parents. Get a number from a friend nearby who's in the algebra class, so you always know what the assignment is. This is just a picture of the Remind 101 for you to see. Remind.com now. And these are just some tips to send home to parents. How to jumpstart, and I'll give you some tips on that in a minute. And just some of these things are just routine kinds of things. But parents don't always know what to do. These kids don't come with a guidebook, so you can really help them. The thing Alex always did was bring home his homework, and I learned that each week, at the end of the week, I've got to go through it and save all the papers, because invariably the teacher sends a note home and says he's failing because he didn't turn in his homework. And you always have, you know, that homework copy as a backup. One of the other things our children do is to forget their books or whatever. So parents, teachers, encourage parents at the end of the day, after homework is over, to put everything together, put it back in the backpack, and then have a specific launch pad. And Kathleen Nadeau came up with that word, but you see it's a visual cue at the point of performance. It's near the door that the child walks out, either to get on the bus or to get in the car to go to school. I also, before I move on to this, want to mention a bit about long-term projects. These are two more slides that I left out inadvertently. But our children have an impaired sense of time, and Russell Barkley says when you impose a time delay, let's say you make the assignment on a Monday and it's due in 2 weeks, that this becomes a disability for a child. So addressing the long-term project should always be in the IEP. The parent should be notified that it's coming, that it's due, so that they can help monitor at home. Things like breaking the assignment into 2 or 3 segments and giving separate grades, because invariably what happened in our household is that on Thursday night at 7:30 he'd come to me and go, my semester project is due tomorrow, and we both would have a heart attack. So there are things like graphic organizers that can help with that. So I need to keep moving because I know I'm running out of time here once I get started talking. Creating a positive learning environment. I added a new slide here also. Well, it's actually included. I amaze myself sometimes. The praise encouragement ratio should be 5 to 1, and it has to be sincere. You can't say fantastic paper. This is true for both parents and teachers if the child in fact knows it's not. So it's better to give them encouragement that is non-judgmental and focus on the effort. Things that you could say are things like, you really worked hard, I bet you're proud you finished the whole puzzle, etc. Because you're trying to teach them to evaluate themselves. So, you know, there is research that says if you give fault praise, that it actually has a reverse negative effect. So the next slide is just an encouragement of using more positive than negatives. For example, if you're the teacher and you notice there are 5 students who are really listening well today, write their names on the board. Name it something, you know, star awards, I don't know, something that's probably, I don't like that. If I gave it thought, I would want to do something differently. And the next day, put 5 more names up there. So during the course of the year or the semester, that everybody's name is on the board. And then if you can, send a note. There's some pre-printed notes that you could use. But then, you know, be specific what they did, and say a big thank you for them. This is something I've learned recently. If you have a student that you're having major challenges with, try something like this. It's called 2 by 10. And you're going to have a personal conversation with a student for 2 minutes for 10 days in a row. Excuse me. Anything they want to talk about. You know, I've got to get a sip of water on too many airplanes.
Well, Chris is getting a sip of water. I'll just jump in to say that you actually can download her handouts right now on the right in your screen. It's a little place that says handouts, and if you click on that behavior attitude web PDF, you'll see that you can download Chris's slides right now rather than waiting until afterwards and coming back to the attitude website. So
thank you for the breather. I needed it. You might find out, for example, that the household is in disarray because the father lost the job, or the father and mother are fighting and there's going to be a divorce. And what they have found with this one child, there was an 85% improvement in his behavior. So simply focusing on the positive, paying attention to the child, looking for the positives makes a huge difference. I want to mention briefly, of course, that the ability to control emotions we know is immature. But another thing I learned recently is that emotions impact learning. So teachers, your classroom needs to be a warm, loving, positive place, because if a child is fearful or anxious in their classroom or angry, the brain is going to produce cortisol, and that blocks their ability to learn or to think clearly or to remember. And so this is critically important to both parents and teachers to be aware of. We also know that there are benefits from physical exercise, and one of the more recent exciting things is that it actually builds new brain cells. So don't let them take away recess. Our kids need physical activity. In the place like Naperville, Illinois, where they have pioneered this, there have been reduced suspension, better test scores and grades, and children are remembering facts better. And here's a slide that fascinates me. It's only 20 students, but the students on the left sat quietly studying for a test, and these students on the right shows a greatly increased brain activity after a 20-minute walk. So the students took the same test, and these students who had exercised for 20 minutes had a higher score. The next slide, I assume it's coming. Come on. Just a list of behavioral strategies in general. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because they asked me to, to talk for a specific time and not go on too long, and I think they know me too. But I will tell you that I have, in teaching teens, probably 13 specific short summaries on behavioral strategies in general. So what I'll show you next are my favorite strategies. 1, 2, 3 Magic is a book written by Tom Phelan, who actually has kids with ADD. That's great for younger children. Giving children's choices are very important. Depersonalizing for older children. And these are things that both teachers and parents can do. Sometimes people with ADHD have trouble with getting started, have trouble finishing their homework, and then maybe come up with a couple of suggestions on how to help them. I've already mentioned if you can't change the ADHD behavior, change the environment, and sometimes simply state expectations. I expect you to do thus and so. That works sometimes. Whatever behavior you attend to the most will increase. So if you can, ignore minor behavior and give an alternative or teach them a skill. So please don't punish a student for characteristics of the disorder. And I've been guilty of that. Not completing homework, not turning it in, not getting started. So you need to remember, and I think the new slides that I send in with the executive function will make you more aware of those types of behaviors. Improve your own behavioral skills and provide accommodations. The end, finally. So,
yeah,
I'm ready.
Thanks, Chris. Great stuff. Lots of questions here. I've had an interesting one from a parent who says that her child holds it together in school, and then when they get home, they just completely fall apart. And I was just thinking, as I was listening to these really logical strategies that you named, whether those aren't also useful for parents on the home front. Be positive. The whole list that you gave of really sort of basic behavior strategies, would those be any different on the home front?
I think you really kind of nailed it just with the description you gave. But what you have to remember is sometimes our children will act out with the people that love them the most because they know they're safe. The other thing is some parents might talk to their doctor about, part of it may be what we call rebound. As the medicine is wearing off at the end of the day, sometimes their behavior becomes a little more irritable. And some doctors will prescribe maybe a 5 milligrams or something of Ritalin or Focalin, the short-acting ones around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But the other thing is to not press them into anything right away. Give them space. If you can, let them do something physical. Go jump on a trampoline. Go shoot some baskets. Listen to music. Give them some time to unwind and give them a little space. There's several options but thank you for also describing using some of these too, Susan. That was a good answer.
Okay, thanks. Here's a great question from Noreen. She says, what have you found to be effective in helping teachers and understand that the students are not making bad choices, but they're exhibiting symptoms?
Well,
that's for many teachers.
That's exactly. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's a tough thing to understand, I think, in some environments.
Well, one of the things you might do is email me, and I will send you I have something called 10 Key Facts about ADHD, and I list all the things about the brain and executive function deficits. And what I find is you can't overwhelm teachers with these too many papers at one time. So that would be one approach. The other approach is, some schools invite me in to do training, and the way I've been able to help teachers understand it is for them to see pictures of the brain and the brain chemistry and the slide that shows, and I didn't show those would have been very useful, the difference between the two brains of children the same age, but one with ADHD and one with not. The pictures are worth 1,000 words. So my personal training, Chad is talking about going online with their teacher-to-teacher training. It's not a reality yet. Perhaps what I could also add to the material that I send to Susan are the slides of the brain, and you get the slides in color. I would ask though that all of this material is copyrighted, and I share it freely. I don't usually give away my slides per se, but I think it's important enough if you can use that to educate teachers that would help. Visit my website, and then later after they've gotten the 10 key facts, in fact the 10 key facts may be on the website. If it's not, write me. But there's also an article in there about executive function, so don't hit them with it all at once, but give them the article on executive function that tells what it is, and it tells how it impacts every academic phase.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And then again, in my Teaching Teens book, and this is for down to about 4th grade, I list specific issues like disorganization, and I give tips. Their impaired working memory, their impaired sense of time management, strategies for teaching writing. There's something like 88 summaries that you can copy out of that book and hand to the teacher to help with certain issues.
That sounds really useful. We have a shorter version. It's called the Parent Teacher Handbook. It was actually written by Ellen Kingsley, the founder of Attitude. It's quite wonderful. It goes symptom by symptom, sort of disorganization, impaired memory, so forth, and gives strategies for home and for school. So yeah, I recommend anything that has specifics around ways that you can suggest is always helpful. Here's a question from a teacher. What's a teacher to do in the moment when an ADHD student just can't keep it together? And the reason I raise this one, Chris, is because of your, I think, very good advice about keeping it positive, which I think is keeping the atmosphere happy, positive. How do you, that sometimes is easier said than done, right?
Well, a couple of things. One is you give the child a note and that says, take this to the library and give it to the media specialist. And in the note, it said, please spend a few minutes talking to the student and then send them back to me. So it gives them a little time to diffuse. You make sure the message is taped up so the kid doesn't read it or sealed in an envelope. And, this is something you've prearranged, or maybe even with the guidance counselor. We also had one where if you expect the child is going to blow up, this is one of those depersonalization things. Alex, some people really get stressed with their ADHD when the work is really hard or the medicine's not working totally. And what I would like for us to have is an emergency backup plan. And so you would, at any time you feel like you're about to blow up or have major problems, come and get this pass off of my desk and go to the guidance, take it to the guidance counselor and sit with her for a while. Now, this all has to be worked out in advance. We did this with Alex. Unfortunately, the day he blew up, the darn guidance counselor was out of the building. And so I said, there has to be a law that the guidance counselor cannot leave the room even to go to the restroom. Obviously I'm exaggerating.
Let's see. One of the struggles I have as an advocate, so this person is an advocate, is that students are exhibiting choice behavior. This is a similar question, but we've had students expelled for persistent disobedience because of, quote, choice behavior. What else can I say about choice behavior? Sounds like this is back to your 10 facts about ADHD solution.
Well, that is true. And here, you remember I told you about the components of executive function that look like choice and laziness and defiance. So that's one thing. You look at those. There's one other fact I don't want to forget, and I'm afraid it's leaving me because I'm trying to explain this one more. Darn it. All right, hit me with a question one more time so that I can get refocused.
This teacher has students who have been expelled for, quote, persistent disobedience because of, quote, choices that they've made, and she's struggling with how to handle that.
All right. One is to educate them about the characteristics of executive function deficit and how they manifest itself. And the second thing I mentioned earlier is you need to be looking for where the learning deficits are. Now, I have a list of behaviors, too. The other thing we find, according to the MTA study, is most of our children are on doses of medication that are too low for peak effectiveness at school. And I have a little simple chart that teachers check that say, is he completing his work? Is he complying with requests? And if not, I show kind of a before and after. There was a child that was in danger of struggling who couldn't play sports. And after just a week later, after the medication had been adjusted, then, because you shouldn't see those behaviors. And maybe that's another slide I need to put in, that how do you know when medication is working? And if they're not exhibiting those behaviors, then the medication is probably not right. Now, it may be that it's too low, or it may be that it's the wrong medicine, but that's just a couple of things. I had the great luxury of spending about 4 months at one school, 1 day a week, and I sit down all the fourth grade teachers in front of me, and I laid out the criteria of ADHD on, one page, and I said, if children are exhibiting these, this is part of the disability, and you should not, don't punish them for it. And then I laid out the same thing with executive function. If you see these, then you need to teach them skills or put accommodations in place. So, my sense is that if a child is being expelled, that he should have been evaluated back for either through 504 or IDEA for services.
Okay. I mean, to your point about the symptoms shouldn't be there, we had a wonderful presentation by David Rabiner about a very simple monitoring system, that you, it's one page that you ask the teacher to complete once a week or once a month. But he's basically, it's to say, he's saying that kids change, and whatever treatment they're on, whether it's medicine, behavior, diet, nutrition, anything, you need to monitor to make sure that those symptoms are not occurring in the classroom, and you can't know that if you don't have feedback from the teacher. Anyway, it's a longer topic but I just want to tell the people listening to look for the David Rabiner webinar on our website, because I thought it was very fascinating, and he offered a simple downloadable tool that he made available freely for people to use. Here's a tip from Jill Murphy. I don't know who Jill Murphy is, but I just want to thank her.
I know who Jill Murphy is.
Frequently posting great tips.
I did not. I'll get even with her. Go ahead.
All right. So her strategy is for parents. Send a resume of your child to the teacher, not just the problems. Most important, also include the areas of strength that the teacher can capitalize on the classroom. So it's all about helping the teacher make a connection with the child so that when the teacher has to deal with bad behavior, they also have a positive concept. So that's a tip from Jill Murphy. Thank you, Jill, as always.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
And another tip, she says, on following directions, make a request to the child and then stop talking. Wait for a count of 30. Wow, that's a long time. And keep a neutral face as you look at the child while the child processes the request. It actually works, she says. So it's a good
Wonderful.
One. Let me see here. Chris, what's your email address? It's chris@chrisdendy.com. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, for those who asked about the, okay. Another thing that you talked about, a strategy which sounds intriguing, is to change the environment if things aren't working. And there's a couple of people wondering if you could give some examples of that, about that.
Well, of course, one is if they can't sit still, you allow them to have fidget toys. You have 2 workstations for them. They complete their math at one place. Perhaps you have a stand-up desk at the back, and they can go there for language arts. My sister teaches high school science issues, physics, anatomy, etc. Actually had an exercise bicycle in the back of the room. So those are some of the kinds of things. You know that they need to fidget. You know, some people, you use more active teaching methods. For example, I love the whiteboards. It's a very low-tech thing. Everybody has one, and I'll say as a class review, okay, class, tell me, what percentage of people have ADHD? And then they write it down and lift it up. So do you see what they're doing? You're incorporating movement that is needed into their day. And then, of course, they take it down. And, of course, you can see at a glance with your 20 students, or however many you have, that who has it, who understands it, and who doesn't it. Or if you know if they're getting hyper, you say, okay, you ask questions for a review, and you say, okay, thumbs up if you think the answer is this, thumbs down if you think the answer is that. Or you have them stand up, or you take them for a walk. Those are some things. They are forgetful, so what you do is we talk about remind.com. We talk about posting it on the web. So, in other words, look at any of the executive skills and say to yourself, what is it that he needs help with? And I'm trying to go back through my notes to get there to see, if I can come up with more specific examples. Being late, if they get lost, our kids sometimes have a sense of direction problems, so you have someone walk with them to the classroom because they have no sense of time to know. Or if they're problems following directions, then you shorten the directions. So changing your teaching strategies will help with that.
Mm-hmm. Here's another symptom that people would love to have some help on. What can the teacher do to help my child stay focused in class? She says she's constantly saying his name and tapping on his desk, and she feels like she's picking on him. And another person says something something similar. She says, what do I do for a student that just sits and does nothing unless I give him constant reminders?
Well, first of all, it sounds like they may not be on medication, or it's on medication that's too low, or maybe not the right medicine. 2/3 of our kids can do well on either Ritalin type, concerted type, or Dexedrine, or Adderall type meds, but there's a select group that does better on one than the other. So, the other thing is you use your students in the classroom and you discuss with the student, John, you have trouble getting started, and I don't want to do anything to embarrass you, so what about if you're not getting started, if either Kathy or John, who sits on either side of you, taps your desk to remind you? Who, you're giving him choice. Who would you like to remind you? Or I know Harvey, I think, had designed a tape that you wore headphones with. I don't know that that's realistic, but there are noise headphones that keep noises out. So you might talk to the kid. You seem to have trouble getting started. Why do you think that is? And sometimes if it's long, or if it's a task they can't do, they're overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. But a teacher can also have a silent tip, pull on the ear, but tapping the desk is singling out and shaming and embarrassing him, and embarrassment is not a behavioral strategy.
Right. Yeah, there does seem to be a because we do see frequently on our webinars, and there's one today, that schools are continuing to take away recess. Here's a mother who says, my child has an IEP, but the school still blames my child for too much talking or forgetting homework, and takes away recess.
Well, I think I wrote an article for you all about that.
You did. Yes, there is an article on recess.
And
several
the
articles.
fact that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, says never take away recess. And the research shows that if you take away recess, you increase acting out behavior. So if folks who attend could, it sounds like you may not be able to talk to the teacher about that, but I always say find the voice of reason at school. If 10 or 11% of our kids have ADHD, there is someone in administration that has a child with ADHD or understands it. Maybe it's the principal, the assistant principal, the guidance counselor, director of special ed, and explain the problem to them and let them see if they will take that on for you. Because, and if you show her the pictures of the brain, that it increases the brain activity and helps the brain work better when they go out for recess. You just never, I didn't think people even did that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a great tip from Suzanne. What I love about these webinars, and people chime in and say what works for their child. She said, provide information in advance. I think she may be a teacher. Ask a student to illustrate next week's lesson. It lets the student get a key idea from the lesson in advance and also show off something they're actually good at. That's an inspired, positive idea, I think. Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah. That's great.
Yes, yeah. I do like that too.
Really good. So let's see. Oh, Mr. Chowdhury. I mean, I think he may be outside the U.S. He says, my boys are inattentive, restless, and they never listen to my instructions. They only want to play games on the computer, and if checked, they start shouting and fighting. What should I do to handle them? Oh, dear.
Well, it sounds like a tough one. It sounds like their ADHD is untreated.
Right.
And, right. Maybe sometimes you have to set kind of a plan. All right, you can play the video games for 10 minutes and then we need to start your homework. Or sometimes, we always used to say what's called a pre-MAC principle. First we work and then we play. But I found that didn't always work all the time. So you do what works. So first you do 10 minutes, 20 minutes on your homework, and then you can play. And remember, our kids can't stay focused very long. But they may have to say, if you don't do your schoolwork, then, then you won't be, if you don't do your schoolwork today, you can't use video games tomorrow. So you hate to do the negative consequences, but sometimes you need to. But it just sounds like, you know, can you have two separate video games and get them in two different rooms so that there's less bickering? You know, I don't know. But just trying to change the environment, that's not an easy one to answer. It sounds like there are a lot of complex things
issues there.
going on here.
There's some questions here which I want to be frequently see an attitude about how to motivate kids or how to get kids to enjoy learning. Here's a person who says, we have a 9-year-old who gets frustrated with school already. He's got a great teacher, a supportive family, but he's not engaged, doesn't feel positive. He's always expressing that he wants to retire already. And another person with a 2nd grader who just says he hates school and doesn't want to go. So that's just so upsetting for parents, you know, it really is.
It is, and part of the problem is that, and I don't mean to get into politics here, but one of the things that's happening with the federal guidelines known as Common Core is that they're forcing the mastery of skills upon children whose brains are not ready to learn them. And so our children get frustrated at school. So if there's a way you can work with a teacher and find out what the specific academic challenge is, and try to find talk with the teacher, the guidance counselor, is how can we find some joy at school? You know, what does he like to do? If he does his homework, can he then go visit with a principal if that's fun? Or could he make the announcements, do some things to feel special, to make the announcements to the class, to, you know, some schools have that before school program. But trying to find some way to build on his gifts. I know I talked to a parent whose child was going to a Montessori school and they were already forcing homework on them. And I was appalled. And the child was avoiding it and not telling the truth. And I don't blame her or him, you know?
Yeah.
The thing is, and I'm not sure for the children who are ready, developmentally, this is fine, but for our children, it's very difficult. And so teachers are really caught in the middle. But find out, you know, get the teacher to talk to him. What does bring him joy? Can he help the coach if that's what he likes? Or if there's music, can he spend a little time? You know, if you get this done, then you can spend a little time with the music director. Or, you know, try to find out why there's no joy. What's going on? In first grade, my son would the teacher would turn out the lights during break, and they had to sit still in their chairs. Now, is that stupid? Excuse me.
Oh, dear.
That
would have killed me as a kid that age. Right.
Direct. Excuse me for my honesty sometimes.
No,
surely
really.
we don't do that anymore. But sometimes if a class is kind of, you know, let him be the line leader. You know, there are just so many little ways that you can reward these kids and make them feel special. Take his pictures sitting in his chair working and brag on him. Make sure his name gets on the board as one of the 5 kids who's done well. Take the picture of him working hard and put it on his desk, and he sees it and reminds him.
You know, maybe there are two wonderful examples posted by Mauricia, who linked learning his 4 times tables to karate kicks. So she wrote the 4 times table on a blackboard and told him when he kicked with his left leg to say 1 times 4, and then with his right arm 2 times 4 on the other one. She said to this day he learned all of his 4 times tables and all of his tables, and each day they did this for over a month, and he still did very well in both karate and times tables, and something similar with fractions, which she tied to horseback riding. That's really ingenious, and I think speaks to your point, Chris, about finding what they love and tying learning to that.
Well, times tables, the fun way, is a great resource too, and they have the addition, subtraction, all the different math facts that our children have trouble memorizing. And I have sections in my book on helping them with memory. It can't be same and similar. It's got to be wild and wacky. Let them spell it out with M&Ms and then eat it. Let them draw it in sand, or one mom let her daughter write her spelling words on the shower in the in the steam because she was taking Hollywood showers anyway.
Right, right, right. That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Well, we unfortunately are just about out of time. We have some wonderful webinars coming up that I wanted to tell this group about. I'm just going to bring that up here. Because this is our season of great webinars, and people like Chris, the really superstars, have all been so willing to speak for Attitude, and we're so grateful. October 8th, topic of huge interest, screen time limits and transitions, how to make sure homework gets done before playing Minecraft with Randy Coleman. October 14, we have Peter Jensen, one of the great gurus of attention deficit disorder, who's going to talk to us about practical advice from 100 parents who get ADHD, who came up with techniques that really work with their children. So that's our ADHD awareness webinar. And then later in the month, Michelle Jaworski, a similar living with adult ADHD. So we love bringing these resources to people, to our audience, and we're thrilled that so many people log in. Chris, thank you so much today, and for all your help. And we'll look forward to putting your slides up, and we're grateful to you. Again, these are copyrighted, but they're available to speakers for your own use without changing them or for handing out. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.